I have a tradition that every time I fly back from Israel, it's a 15-hour flight, and there's a nice bookstore in the airport, so I go and buy a couple of books to read through the flight. The tradition started before we had internet on the flights, and this time I walked in and I see this book that says "Fractured Attention: How to Heal the World Fractured by Technology," and that got me intrigued. And Professor Micha Goodman, I've read a few of his previous books, very interesting historian, but like, what is he writing about? So I opened the book and I'm translating from Hebrew now. And he basically says that in the last decade, the democratic world has been going through a severe political crisis, which is reflected in an increase in hostility and polarization. At the same time, and I was familiar with that, in the last decade, the Western world has been going through a severe psychological crisis, which is manifested in a surge in the data on depression and anxiety. And I was going like, interesting. I can even partially relate to it myself. Both are the result of a new and strange kind of deficit created in the world since the outbreak of the digital revolution. That's when he was starting to get me. That's interesting. These two things are intertwined. Deficit in the amount of free attentions of human beings. Like, what the hell is he talking about? So, decided I'm buying the book. Finished reading it in 15 hours and said, it's something that is worth discussing and presenting. The book was published only a month ago, so it's not available in English. I asked Micha for permission to kind of summarize the book, and I contacted him on email and he gave me the permission. But before we start, I want to make a couple of points. The first one which he's making is in the book is this is not against technology. We are all technologists. We all live on technology. The example that he gives is that he has a physical disorder that if he had to write physically, he would never have become a writer. He can't write physically. Technology saved him, built his career. I'm, as you know from LinkedIn, a digital carpenter. Most of the people watching here are technologists as well. This is not against technology. It's about understanding some potential impact of technology on our life. And what I love about Goodman is that he's actually presenting ideas for solution. He's not just saying this is a problem, but he's also trying to outline solutions. The next thing is I'm going to try to summarize a 200-page book in about 30 minutes, which means I'm going to do it in justice. And it also means if there are any mistakes, errors, and the likes, they are my fault. If you love it, the credit goes to Professor Goodman. So with that, let me try to get to the book. To start the book, he's telling an interesting Jewish story. Jews are supposed to study the Torah. But what do they actually study? If you go and look at Jewish when they study, they don't study the Torah. They don't study the set of rules and memorizing it one by one. They study something that in Jewish tradition is called the Talmud. How this rabbi argued with the other rabbi, countered by the argument of the other rabbi, countered by this one. So it's a study of arguments, of opposing opinions against each other, and building the balance out of those opposing opinions. That's how the view of the right way to approach public discourse is in traditional Judaism. And he's presenting it as something we should say, keep it in mind. That's an interesting tidbit. And then he goes and says, well, let's look at our public discourse now. And we all feel that it's tribal and have moved into the extremes, but is it just a feeling? What's the data? So he's putting some research from different researchers that's showing, if in 1994, 1/3 of the population was right, 1/3 of the population liked the other side. In 2014, only 1/10 of the population actually likes the other political spectrum. If you look at animosity, so not just liking the opinions, but liking the people, we have gone from 30% of the left liking the right to 40 on the right liking the left in 95 to 7% being able to see the other side as humans, as connected, liking them. So there's absolutely a breakdown in the last 20 years of the tribalism in society. Now, you can go and say, that's because the left has a horrible leader, or the right has a horrible leader, or their opinions have moved. So you can go and say this is specific to an opinion. But that doesn't really work, because if you look globally, you realize that the problem exists in Brazil and in Israel and in the US and in multiple countries in Europe. And there is a Canadian, thumbs up, researcher called Marshall McLaughlin, who published a very interesting article, and in which he says, when you see something like this, the problem is not specific to one country, it's actually the medium that's causing it. And he's looking at historical perspective and the Industrial Revolution and before, and basically says, to understand what the issue is, you need to look at the medium, not at specific opinions. Now, what does it mean? And again, that's something that probably will be familiar to some of you, is the foundation of kind of liberal democracy is the concept of public square, a place where people meet, exchange opinions, protest, see the other side, get announcements, and so on. What used to be a public square has drastically changed when it became digital. It is digital now. It's everything from Washington Post online to Facebook to Twitter to online communities to MSNBCs. This is not a public square, it's a private square. And the private square has two characteristics. One we'll talk about and one will not. One characteristic is that it's owned by very few individuals. We are not going to talk about it. The second part is that the private square is monetized by advertisement. Most of the public square is driven by companies that are being paid by advertisement. What is advertisement? It's capturing your attention. So, hold on. So, if our attention is continuously monetized, and there are some of the strongest forces working on monetizing it. How are they doing? Tim Wu in Colombia is calling it the attention economy, and he's saying which industry is bigger, the oil industry or the attention industry? By far, the attention industry, if you look at market caps. There is more money in capturing your attention, more smart people going around trying to dig to your attention than you can imagine. So next time when you go in Facebook to say, I'll just check one more thing, and 45 minutes later you're still on your phone, don't really blame yourself. There are 100 people writing smart engineers to try to figure out how to capture your attention. And the algorithms behind them are all big data. They don't understand true or false or anything else. They just see what other people are seeing, what got their attention, and then showing it to you in order to capture your attention. So it's not intentionally bad, it's just about maximizing attention, because maximizing attention is maximizing dollars. And the result, we almost have no more attention. You know, the moments in between, the quiet moments without a phone, used to be quite a lot in our life like this, waiting for the elevator, driving, sitting someplace outside. The in-between moments are gone. Our attention is completely captured. And the next part he's asking is, what are the things that help capture our attention? And he brings a couple of psychological research on what are the different posts or publicity that will cause us to get glued, that is viral. What are those emotions? And two of the strongest emotions in capturing our attention are rage, that's usually derived from the feeling of unfairness. So the algorithm sits there and realizes, oh, this algorithm, this post or this content caught more people's attention, I'll show it. But the reason is that we are showing more and more things that relate to unfairness and rage. And you know, I'm not even talking Facebook, just look at some of the front pages of some of the media companies, and you will see how more and more of the titles you can really direct and say, what's the feeling that this title is causing? And it will have to do with rage and unfairness. The second part that Goodman is highlighting is, you know, if you need to capture somebody's attention, what section is bigger and more interesting, the fiction section in the bookstore or the non-fiction? It's much, much easier to create interesting stories if you don't have to adhere to the facts. And if all you care about is capturing attention, stories that don't adhere to the facts are likely to capture much more attention than stories that adhere to the facts. Now, an interesting point that he brings up here is a research by Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, kind of one of the top people in behavioral economics and psychology, that identifies that the feeling of something being correct is very similar to the feeling of something being familiar. So the more something is familiar, the more you feel it's correct. So if the algorithm keeps on showing you things that, you know, are not true, but, you know, they attracted your attention, after a while, more and more people will start believing that this is true. The line between what's true and false has gone away. You combine it with a third psychological issue called confirmation bias, which means if you put many articles in front of people, usually they will prefer to read what matches their opinions. Not always, but mostly you will be interested in seeing things that match your opinions. So as you put those things together, and algorithms, without any bad intentions, are basically throwing more and more things at you that cause you to feel enraged, that are not necessarily true, but you have seen them so many times that you think that they are true, and you mostly see things like this, not the opposing opinions. No surprise that the society is breaking apart into two tribes that can't stand each other, and thinks that the other one is horrible and lives in fiction. Not an intentional result of technology, but an inherent result of the business model of the media industry. The second topic of the book is what Goodman calls the psychological crisis. And I didn't know it, but evidently in the US every year, 500,000 teenagers are being interviewed to understand their tendency toward depression, anxiety, suicidal. And up to 2011, the numbers stayed about the same, fluctuated a little bit up and down. Starting with 2011, we have seen 58% in suicidal thoughts among females, 30% increase in depression among young teens, men and male and female. A significant continuous increase in those phenomena. Now you can go and say, that's just the US, materialistic, that's part of the society, whatever, but it's not. You look at Israel, similar numbers. You look at other countries, similar numbers. Something is happening that's a global phenomenon. You can go and say, it's the 2008 financial crisis. That was global. No, because the crisis is over and the numbers keep on going up. So it has to be something else. And he points to a couple of things. The first one of it reminds us that 2007 was when the iPhone came out. And by 2010, 2011, all the parents started giving it to their kids. So the prevalence of social media glued to your hand really started around that time frame. There is an interest parallel in Facebook consumption, in Instagram consumption that follows that. So now he's going and saying, so what might be the reason that links this wonderful, amazing device that lets us stay connected with depression and anxiety? And he is bringing up a couple of interesting studies here. One is something he calls the boredom paradox. Dan Gilbert in Harvard did a study, picked a couple thousand people, and for a period of, I think, a few months, kept on sending them random questions by text that said, please rate on 1 to 5, I think, 3 questions. How happy are you? What are you doing? What are you thinking about? The question was, what are the people that are happiest thinking about? And the interesting answer that surprised many of us is they were thinking about what they are doing now. They lived in the moment. They pay attention to what they were going and doing at the time, not dreaming about something on the future. Yeah. This is, by the way, a very interesting difference between Western and Eastern societies. In the West, we think about the moment as the opportunity to achieve something in the future. What are we doing now in order to get something in the future? Eastern thoughts, and especially Buddhism, is much more about live the moment. What matters is the moment. There's balance between those, but it's an interesting thing to keep in mind. The second story that I related to is a story about a Harvard psychoanalyst called Mark Epstein. And Mark at some point decided to study yoga and went to one of those yoga camps of 1 week. You don't talk and meditate for 7 hours a day. And Mark tells the story that in one of those days, they were serving breakfast, and he had this beautiful wheat toast, and he put some butter on it, and he tried to focus on the moment, on eating it, and he really loved it. And then he waited for lunch, and lunch they had the same toast, and he was so happy, and again he managed to be so slow and focused on it and ate it, and loved every moment, the taste, the feeling. And then he decided to get a second one. And as he was getting the second one, he put it in front of him and started looking for the butter. And then he realized that his wife told him to really do the laundry on the way back from the camp. And she hates doing laundry, and he needs to find a place to do the laundry. And he wasn't sure where he can get the laundry. And he was all thinking that he needs to do it before he gets home. And suddenly he looked around and he didn't have his toast. Where the hell did the toast go? And then he realized that he knew where it went. He ate it. He just never realized that he ate it. And he said loudly in this quiet pace, "Where did my toast go?" And he stayed quiet for a few more seconds and said, "Where the hell did my life go? I've paid so much attention to other things that I've forgot to understand what it means to live in the moment." Goodman adds to it different MRI study around mindfulness that really show how different parts of the brain work differently when we are focusing on the moment. But the underlying claim is we, by taking away our focus on the moment, which is not easy, like it's not easy to just sit there and focus on the moment, we are taking a lot of our ability to be happy away. The second part of the second underlying reason is what he calls the loneliness paradox. People need rich connections, not just a thumbs up, but rich connections. He's asking the question and you can think about it, what is the harshest criminal penalty that can be imposed on an individual? Other than death sentence, there is one penalty, and that's solitary confinement. Human needs both the loneliness as well as the social contact. And this is a very delicate balance that today is broken. The third part he identifies as contributing to depression is there is a old adage that says, who is rich? One who is content with what he has. But when you're displayed hundreds of options for every choice, whatever you choose is not as satisfying anymore. And again, lots of psychological research into choice theory, what happens when you have 3 choices, 10 choices, 50 choices. And not only that we have more choices, we also get to see more and more and more what other people are. So our comparison, our ability to be content with what we have is continuously challenged as we scroll down to see how every one of the 500 people we know is doing. And that also brings fairness into it. Wait, it's not fair that he's doing it, or it's not fair that I only have this in my life. I deserve more than that. So there are multiple psychological reasons, and this is the big part of the book, so I'm not doing it justice, that are leading us to realize, by taking away our attention, both of those crises, the political one and the psychological one, are happening. The psychological one, our intention is elsewhere. We are not living in the moment. We don't even know how to live in the moment anymore. We are lonely, even though we have many likes, and we can't be content because we keep on comparing. So that's the summary of the 2 crises. Now he gets around to thinking, can we solve it? Or is it inevitable that this will stay this way? And he reminds us a few things, that when the Industrial Revolution happened, people worked 18 hours a day, hardly paid, and waste was thrown all over the place. Suddenly we had modern social laws about how people should be employed, what's the minimum wage, health insurance, stuff like that. There is environmental laws, there is inspection of restaurants. You can't go and dump any place you want. Society and governments have readjusted to counter the negative impacts of the Industrial Revolution. Same should happen and can happen when it comes to the digital revolution. And he is suggesting that the solution has 3 dimensions that needs to happen in parallel. One is on the regulatory front, the second is cultural front, and the third one is what he called TLT, technology liberating technology. On the regulation front, he's pointing out a couple of things, and I'm going to take the liberty of adding a couple of my thoughts here as well. How do we regulate this information? That's critical that it happens. There are a couple of proposals. I personally published a couple of them on LinkedIn, especially around the solution being toward augmenting media with fact-checking and opposing opinion and who's behind the media rather than necessarily blocking media. Another direction is revising libel law, and you see it in other democratic societies, for example, Germany or the UK, have very different rules, even though it's free speech, around when you can sue somebody for lying or coming up with fake claims. The one he is not talking about, but actually started to happen and I'm researching right now, is taxation. At one point of the book is comparing the attention industry, mining for attention, generating money from nothing, to the gold industry, in which you go and you mine for gold. And by the way, when we mined in Latin America, many times the people didn't think there is any value to gold, the same way that we didn't think there is value to attention. But the attention industry is mining and generating huge amount of money, so let's tax it. How can we tax it? Do we tax it based on negative goods, so it's pollution, and there are rules how to tax pollution? Or do we tax it as a positive goods like gold and other earth minerals? Lots of discussions. There are currently multiple states in the US that have proposed rules about how to tax the money generated by the attention industry. But that's actively happening in those 3 directions. The second part he's talking about is cultural. For us in the audience who remember something from the 80s or 90s, you didn't go out and see that many people running in the street or jogging. What you used to see is many people smoking. Well, we didn't make smoking completely illegal, people still allowed to do it, but there was a lot of cultural movement that placed a negative stigma towards smoking. Running had a positive stigma, and people run and work out today. So the ability to affect behavior by promoting certain positive attitudes within society. So putting attention toward living more in the now, putting phones away when you go into dinner or go at home, realizing that being responsiveness and replying immediately is way overrated. Nothing will happen if people will wait a little bit more. One proposal that I started research after reading it is following Cass Sunstein from Harvard. Ideas in Nudge is what happened if the attention industry sent you a monthly email stating that during this month you have viewed advertisement for 4 hours, 15 seconds, and these advertisements are worth $300. That's what they collected for them. Imagine your reaction now both toward Facebook or Twitter if you realize they made $300 on your 4 hour or 9 hour of attention. That's pure transparency, pure piece of information, but it changes how people culturally think about their attention and the people taking it away. The third part was on technology liberating technology. Everything from being able to block technology in specific small areas like a room or a conference room or a restaurant in order to increase productivity. Information in media that allows you to see the opposing side, not just your side, automatically injecting it. And that ties into some of the legislation I wrote about on augmenting reality and disinformation. I'm personally interested in the concept of a screenless smartphone. Can still give you direction, tell your calendar, listen to music, take photos. It just does it through voice rather than the screen. So you can't multitask anymore. All the information is in your fingerprint, but no multitasking. This concept intrigues me. So that's the book. It leaves lots of interesting questions. The individual and the communities are badly damaged. In the community dimension, we have to heal speech. On the individual level, we need to heal silence. Bring back those different components into our life. This can be done. It was done before historically, but this is the most important challenge facing our society in the 21st century. So that's the book.